This university rank holder, who was about to get admission to Harvard, found himself trapped in the mysterious grip of Mother Nature, an experience that completely changed his life. The adventurous story begins with a man named Chris, who is shown driving his car through an endless stretch of road. After several hours of traveling, he finally steps out of the vehicle and thanks the man who dropped him off. That man, after handing Chris a few pieces of equipment, warns him one last time, "Think again. Where you're going, coming back won't be easy." But Chris had already made up his mind. Without hesitation, he took all the gear and set off on his journey. The place he was headed to was one of Alaska's icy wilderness regions, an area rarely visited by travelers. Chris was now one of the few daring enough to explore this unknown land. Many news channels had already reported how dangerous it was, especially because the temperature dropped drastically at night. Yet Chris still decided to venture deep into this treacherous landscape to begin his expedition. It was daytime when he decided to pitch his tent at a small spot. Food was already scarce, as he had left most of his resources behind on the way. Why he did that, and why he chose to depend entirely on nature, would soon become clear. But as Chris faced every challenge that lay ahead, we too can imagine ourselves in his place, trying to survive using only the techniques experts recommend in extreme conditions. For now, Chris pulled out a small gun and started hunting for food. After several attempts, he managed to catch a few snow rabbits. A sense of satisfaction filled him. He felt connected to nature and thrilled by the experience. While exploring, he stumbled upon an old van that surprisingly had space to live inside, a perfect shelter for his adventure. After resting and freshening up, Chris set out again, wandering deeper into the frozen terrain where he spotted several wild animals. He considered them as gifts from nature, symbols of life's deep connection to the world around us. In that moment, his mind drifted back to the time when he graduated from university. Proud parents filled the auditorium, cheering for their children's success. Chris's parents were especially overjoyed, though they hadn't always believed in him. He had proved them wrong by earning top ranks through sheer hard work. His professors admired him, and his parents couldn't be prouder. After graduating with excellent marks, his family threw a small celebration. His sister, Renie, joined the party, and together they laughed, ate, and enjoyed the evening. During their conversation, they talked about how Chris's high ranking could easily get him admitted to Harvard. His life seemed set. He'd study there, work for a multinational company, and build a successful future. His father was so proud that he offered to replace Chris's old car with a brand new one. But Chris politely refused. He didn't like investing in things that would eventually lose value. No matter how expensive a car was, it would deteriorate over time. Renie then looked at her brother and asked, "Is this really what you want?" Chris's face reflected a quiet calm, revealing that deep down, he wasn't truly happy with the path laid out for him. Renie simply told him, "Do what makes you feel right." Renie had always believed in her brother. She knew from the very beginning that Chris would do something meaningful with his life. After saying this, she left, but her words kept echoing in Chris's mind. He couldn't stop thinking about what he truly wanted to do. The truth was, Chris had always loved exploring since childhood. Solo traveling gave him a sense of freedom that nothing else could, and whenever he got the chance, he would set off to discover new places. But now, after his sister's words, he began to feel that this might be his last chance. There was still some time left before he had to leave for Harvard, and in that gap, he made a life-changing decision, to go on an adventure that would allow him to explore the entire world. Chris handed all his remaining savings to Renie, hoping she could use the money in a better way. He was already so deeply immersed in this idea that before leaving, he burned all his identification documents and credit cards. He wanted to rely entirely on nature during this journey, with no ties to the modern world. He packed only a few essential supplies and set out on his new path. Chris had enough money to travel the world in luxury, but that wasn't what he wanted. For him, true adventure came from surviving on the bare minimum, from facing the raw elements head-on. Along the way, he even burned the rest of his money, leaving himself with absolutely nothing, no wealth, no safety net, and no plan. It was just him, alone in the vast world, with no idea where he was headed or how he would survive the days to come. Chris, who now had no resources left, was slowly moving forward, asking people for help along the way. By now, he had covered many tourist places he had planned to visit, but his main mission was to travel around the entire world, something that could take a long time. Still, no matter what happened, Chris was determined to do it with his bare minimum resources. There was no one to stop him because he hadn't informed anyone about his plans. Meanwhile, we see Chris's parents, who had been worried about their son for days. They hadn't received any calls from him and had no idea where he was. So, they decided to visit his apartment to surprise him. But when they arrived, they discovered that Chris wasn't there. His apartment was about to be sold because he had listed it before leaving. After asking the caretakers, they learned that Chris had left 2 weeks ago, but no one knew where he had gone. This made his parents extremely anxious. Then we see Saran, who had a feeling about where her brother might be, but she refused to tell their parents no matter what. Chris was now in California, and while walking ahead, he noticed a couple, a husband named Renie and his wife Jane, who were out enjoying their vacation. After getting to know Chris, they invited him to join them. Since they had a vehicle, they could cover long distances quickly. The three of them started traveling together, visiting different places across California. That night, Renie and Jane shared their food with Chris, and Jane began to really like him. She asked about his life and parents and wondered why he was traveling alone. Chris honestly told her that his parents were good people, but their marriage had become so old and tense that they often argued. His father only wanted him to become a successful man and earn a lot of money. Because of that, he constantly pressured Chris to be a top-ranking student and get a high position in a multinational company. But from the beginning, Chris had always been passionate about exploration. He was simply following what his parents had told him to do. His parents used to fight frequently, and that deeply affected him. They never divorced, but their children's upbringing suffered as a result. Still, Chris didn't hold any serious grudges against them. Renie and Jane began to feel emotionally connected to Chris because there was a warmth in him that made them feel close. They decided to continue their journey together. The next morning, Renie was sitting on some rocks, quietly watching Jane as she walked alone along the beach, looking sad and lost in thought. There was something troubling her that she couldn't share with him. Soon, Chris arrived and asked Renie why he looked so quiet. Renie then explained that, in the beginning, his relationship with Jane had been strong, but over the years, the distance between them kept growing. It felt like Jane no longer loved him. Chris gently advised him to see things from a different perspective. He explained that sometimes people's past experiences are so painful that they get lost in them and can't see the future clearly. People like that just need a little hope, to know they're safe with you. You have to reassure them that whatever pain they suffered in the past won't repeat itself. Chris said Jane needed that assurance. Since Renie wasn't very good at handling such emotions, he asked Chris to help. Without hesitation, Chris agreed and went straight down toward Jane. He talked to Jane for a long time by the beach, explaining things gently and helping her see life differently. After a while, both of them returned to Renie, smiling and happy, and the three spent the night together peacefully. The next day felt almost miraculous. Jane and Renie seemed deeply reconnected, their bond stronger than ever. Whatever insecurities and painful experiences Jane had been holding on to were finally gone. Renie, overjoyed, promised Jane that he would never leave her again, and all the credit went to Chris, who had understood their situation so well. But Chris couldn't stay with them for long. The next morning, he packed up his belongings and set out once again on his journey to explore different parts of the world. Before leaving, he wrote a short message for Renie and Jane, something that might make them feel sad after reading it. Yet, in the end, Chris knew he had to continue his solo travels and accomplish everything on his own. Meanwhile, Chris's father received a call from police officers who were still investigating his son's disappearance. They informed him that Chris's car had been found in a forest, perfectly intact, with no signs of an accident. It looked as if Chris had intentionally left it there so that no one could trace him. The officers asked if Chris had any conflicts at home that might have made him leave, and his father explained everything he knew, clearly worried about his son's safety. We then see Chris in South Dakota, where he met a farmer named Wayne. Chris decided to stay with Wayne and began learning modern farming and harvesting techniques. He spent a lot of time understanding every aspect of the work. Along with his travels, he wanted to try new things that most people often missed out on. Wayne trusted Chris and taught him everything he knew. Within a few days, Chris had gained a lot of knowledge about harvesting. After work, Chris often met Wayne's friends, asking them how he could learn different survival techniques for living in the wilderness, how to preserve meat and handle situations that required survival skills. Wayne told him to meet a man named Kevin, one of their group members who had spent a lot of time living in harsh conditions. So Wayne took Chris to a local bar to introduce him. They had been drinking quite a bit, and soon, Chris and Wayne got into deep conversations. Chris openly said that most people were selfish, they always tried to control others for their own benefit. He gave examples of politicians, multinational company bosses, and even his own parents, explaining how selfish people forced their dreams on others, especially their children, without ever asking what they truly wanted. Hearing such serious thoughts, Wayne advised Chris not to get too caught up in these things right now. After that, Chris began spending more time with Kevin, who started teaching him all the survival techniques he knew in great detail. Days passed like this for Chris as he continued learning and improving his skills. Meanwhile, on the other side, Chris's father had hired a private investigator to find out where his son was. The investigators agency launched a full-scale search across the entire country to trace any leads about Chris's whereabouts. One day, while Chris was staying at a small camp, several police officers suddenly arrived at the site. But they weren't there to arrest Chris, they were there for Van, who had been caught using illegal satellite piracy. The officers detained Van and prepared to take him away for punishment. Before leaving, Van spoke to Chris one last time, telling him to believe in himself and never give up, no matter how difficult the journey ahead might be. He said that Chris had the potential to take over his entire setup if he wanted to. As he walked away, Van warned him again, never go to Alaska during the winter, it's extremely dangerous. Chris stood there, lost in thought, wondering how he would continue his journey from here. But just like Chris, if any of us ever dream of exploring the world and don't know where to start, there are some smart ways to plan a world tour. After watching many travel documentaries, I've found that one of the best routes is through Europe, covering countries like France, Germany, Italy, and Spain. The next is the Americas route, passing through the US, Mexico, Peru, and Brazil, and then continuing toward Asia. From there, one can explore India, Thailand, Vietnam, and Japan, covering more than half the world's most fascinating destinations. It's always best to start with countries that offer easy visa access, and of course, using Google Maps efficiently is key to navigating these places. Plus, if we document our travels and start a travel vlog on YouTube, we can earn money while exploring the world. Meanwhile, Chris had already set off along the road to Mexico when he came across a massive lake. The lake stretched far ahead, eventually connecting to the ocean. Seeing the strong water currents, Chris got the idea to go rafting, even though he had no prior experience. He approached a guard and requested permission to cross the lake. But the guards firmly warned him that it was far too dangerous, especially for someone inexperienced, it would be like committing suicide. Ignoring their warnings, Chris secretly stole a raft and slipped quietly into the water. Chris faced a lot of problems for quite some time, but he had learned rafting well and had already crossed the main route. His next destination was Mexico. There were many mountains along the way, but Chris didn't stop. While moving forward, he saw two couples who had come there to spend their vacation. When they realized Chris was on a world tour, they were very surprised, because traveling such a long distance with the help of a raft is extremely difficult. They appreciated him and even provided some food. Chris had thought he would rest there for a while, but later he discovered that a river patrolling team had arrived, determined to catch him at any cost. Without thinking twice, Chris pushed the raft forward and moved away from there. It seemed like he was exploring every place so quickly that he could complete a world tour in a very short time. Along the way, Chris documented all his travel experiences for a documentary and wrote a thank you letter to Renie, letting him know he was using all the techniques Renie had taught him. Those skills had helped him progress so far. Now Chris had reached the United States, but his raft had broken. With no travel or accommodation options, he started boarding trains that carried goods. Somehow, he managed to arrange food and other necessities and continued his journey. Chris kept wandering through the streets of the United States and noticed some businessmen talking on the side. At one point, he imagined himself in their place, thinking that if he had listened to his parents and gone to Harvard, he might have been enjoying life as smoothly as they were. The hardships he was facing made him doubt his own decisions. He continued his journey by traveling on trains without tickets, but some officers caught him red-handed and beat him severely, forcing him off the train, leaving him to continue by road. By then, Chris had reached a place in California. After exploring for a while, he was shocked to find Renie and Jane there. Jane was overjoyed to see him and hugged him tightly. Renie suggested that Chris stay with them for a few days and explore like a family. Although Chris hadn't planned to stay, when Jane told him about her son, who had grown distant from her, Chris saw the love for her child in her eyes and agreed to stay for a few days, wanting Jane to feel that he was like her son. During a local festival, Chris met a girl named Tracy, and they felt an instant attraction. While talking, Renie asked Chris why he didn't miss his family and suggested he meet them, hoping it might resolve things. Chris, however, wasn't in that mood, he only wanted to continue toward Alaska. Tracy would often join him when she had free time, as both loved reading, and through this shared hobby, they became good friends. Chris spent a few days with them so fully immersed that he lost track of time. Tracy even tried to get intimate with him, but Chris refused due to his young age. The next morning, he prepared to leave for Alaska, leaving Jane, Renie, and Tracy deeply saddened. Jane went with him to the outskirts of the city to give him a proper farewell. As Chris finally moved on, he felt a sense of emptiness, realizing how much he had enjoyed the moments spent with them. It dawned on him that true happiness lies in being with family. Recognizing his mistake, Chris wanted to return to his family as soon as possible. He reached the same river he had passed earlier. On the way, he met an elderly man named France, who worked at a nearby camping site. Seeing the young man under the scorching sun, France immediately offered him a lift to his camping site. There, Chris saw a beach where people didn't wear clothes, but instead of going there, he moved to a deserted area where France had previously stayed. Chris helped set up the camp very efficiently, which made France realize how intelligent he was. France started asking about Chris's parents, but Chris said he no longer lived with them. Gradually, he began telling France everything: how he had left his family to go on a world tour, how no one truly understood him, and how people always wanted him to do things their way. France then brought Chris to his home and shared his own story. He used to serve in the army, but his wife and son had died in a car accident. Since that day, he had lived alone, realizing how unlucky it is to have no family. This made Chris reflect even more on whether leaving his own family had been a mistake. The next day, France taught Chris how to make designs on leather belts, which was his profession, and Chris quickly picked up the skill. He was steadily gaining experience and knew deep down that he would eventually complete this final leg of his journey and return to his family. Before leaving, Chris thought several times about parting ways with the old man, but France understood and offered to drop him off the next day. As they moved toward Alaska, France even offered to adopt Chris, but Chris saw it as a last resort. He wanted to reach Alaska first and decide later. Chris's journey became even more challenging because Alaska was extremely cold. His mind was full of questions, while his parents prayed constantly for his safety and hoped he would return to them soon. Chris now relied entirely on his survival instincts, using all the skills he had learned from Ren and Kevin: hunting animals, preserving meat, and surviving in the wild. Shockingly, he arrived near the place where he had seen a van, meaning he was close to home. Still, he wanted to remain independent and not trouble anyone. While hunting, he killed several animals but didn't know how to preserve the meat. The smell attracted dangerous foxes, and wolves began eating the dead animals, leaving Chris with nothing to eat. Slowly, his body started to weaken from hunger, so he survived by eating vegetables and edible plants to regain some strength. One night, he accidentally ate a poisonous plant, felt dizzy, and became extremely weak. With no one around to help him, he realized he might die. Yet, in his final moments, he saw everyone who had crossed his path on this journey: Jane, Renie, Kevin, their parents, and even Juan, who had already been released from jail. Meanwhile, Jane and Renie were living happily in their married life, and Tracy had found a new boyfriend. But despite all this, Chris was taking his last breaths. He left all his belongings in the same spot where he had been writing everything in his book. Slowly, he waited, and finally, he passed away. A few days later, officers found Chris's dead body inside the van. His book contained his entire experiences, how he had felt from the beginning and what he truly wanted. Perhaps now his parents realized that they shouldn't have pressured their children, and that if they had allowed him to do what he enjoyed, their son might still have been alive. Sadly, this is where our story ends.